So, why would we get into beach numerology? What is so special or important about it? So, the first thing that is great about beach numerology is that it understands mathematics from a symbolic perspective. So, not only will it bring us spiritual or symbolic messages from numbers, but it will point to its root within mathematics or a given system. For example, if we're thinking about time, right, then there's always going to be this set principle, but there's always going to be a more sort of referenced, right? So for example, right, if we're taking 6 o'clock, right, as rising, like that's when the sun rises at the equator generally, right, speaking more from a theoretic standpoint, right, then 6 ends up representing sunrise, right, and we can associate this with Aries, right, and then so that's an understanding of taking a given system and understanding what it's measuring in order to understand its symbolic value. Because we could say that, you know, we could just take broad mathematics, right? And we could say that, okay, 12 is a function of 3 by 4, right? 3 times 4. And 3 is modal, and 4 is elemental, which we know zodiacally as cardinal, fixed, mutable, and fire, water, air, and earth. So if we're thinking about the clock, we could say that 6, because of on the dial of 4, it would be fire, water, air, earth, and then fire, water, and then it would be on the dial of 3, cardinal, fixed, mutable, cardinal, fixed, mutable. So it would be mutable water. You know, we could attribute that because 6 does represent mutable water from a broad mathematics perspective. But I think the important thing to understand when we're incorporating numerology is that numbers are always a measurement and they're always referencing something. So if they are not just broad mathematical numbers and numbers we're, say, drawing on a sigil or on a license plate number, if they're not just kind of a broad mathematical alignment of numbers, I don't think we can apply as many techniques to understand what that number means. I think the best place to start is going to the given system that you're measuring in order to find more information. So a lot of people, I think, won't like to hear this because we want to gain more information than, you know, based on the time of our birth or something like that. We want a little more information than maybe our horoscope shows, right? But basically what this would be telling you is that the time of your birth and the hour is just showing where the sun is, right? And it's just showing just that. And so that's not really it's not really that important past understanding your house placement, and then understanding how your specific measurement applies to your house placement of your sun would bring out the sort of how you express that number. Because numbers are like water, they're a measurement. So based on their given system, they inherit their symbolic expression, right? So this is why 1 can mean Aries, right? But at 1 o'clock, it's not usually sunrise. It's not usually an Aryan time. It's more, if anything, like Leo or Cancer, right? So understanding that is, I think, a little important, or it's like more 10th house, right? And yeah, a lot of people might not want to hear that, because what that means is I kind of, in a lot of ways, understand what our calendar is trying to do. Because, for example, right, taking into account the calendar, it has 12 months, right? But the first month starts in Capricorn season. So what this is trying to do is, with the overarching Capricorn season, it's trying to reference the individual, right? And so what I think this is trying to do is, this is putting 1 or the individual in Capricorn spot, and for like trying to make the individual work through Capricorn, right? and work through that greater square. And I think that's kind of what they're pointing to, right? But if we want to take that for what it is, it doesn't have as much importance as your actual sun placement, because that's what that's measuring, right? And so I think that's important to understand, is this was a system created, right, to measure what your zodiac tells you. So if we're trying to draw information from those numbers, there's kind of a little bit of, I feel like, dissonance coming in, because we're basically saying, on one hand, for me, right, I'm an Aries sun, but on the other hand, I'm 4, right, because I was born in April, and that makes me like a little bit referencing Capricorn. If we think about fire, water, air, earth, right, and then we think about cardinal, fixed, mutable, cardinal, it would be Capricorn, right? So, you know, just understanding that, I think, is the best place to start, right? But then there are times where then the broad mathematics will come into play, right? Like, say, when we're splitting, when we're going minutes will really be important, because they are basically separating half a sign, right? Because it would just be an hour into, yeah, because 2 hours would be a whole sign. So half a sign into 60 points, right? Which is really interesting. And then we even have seconds too. So we really split it up. But the thing about the 60 that we could draw from is the 60 references 12 by 5, right? And 12 is 3 by 4. So it'd be 3 by 4 by 5, right? And so this means each time, not only would we move on the dial of 5, we'd move on the dial of 4, and the dial of 3 as well. So this is where we could get into minutes. So for example, I was born at 7:26, right? So the individual placement on 3, 2 and 6 add to 8, so it would be fixed. On 4, it would be earth, and you could just, it's divisible by 4, right? So fixed earth, right? And then by 5, 26 would be 1. So this would be controller, the most yang, the most left out of 5, because we would have the most left 1, the most right 5, right? The center, or the fixed, or the realization, or the incorporation, the realization 3, right? The sort of air principle 2, and the sort of earth principle 4, because it's like realizing more feminine, right, earth, and then it's realizing more masculine, air. So I would sort of have this power, right, to what I say, fixed earth, right? This power to realize, right? This power to manifest, interestingly enough. So, lucky me. Creative control over Taurus, right? Over reality. Get creative with reality, which sounds like me. So, it's interesting to note that. So, that's how then the minutes and the seconds, right, we can get into, because they're splitting it up, and they're creating their own sort of system, right? That's sort of balanced, right? Yeah. So that's just one point I want to get into mind, is with beach numerology, we're able to see through all the layers of cognitive dissonance that numbers will have us kind of tread through, and see what they're really pointing towards in a way. So if we think about now, let's say, so talked about the year. If we talk about the month, right? Now the month is lunar, and so the month doesn't actually always go on a cycle of 28 or have a specific cycle at all. But this is where we start to see the month just tell us basically where the sun is in a sign, and would give reference to the moon, right? So this is where I feel like by 28, and also knowing, like I said, that mainly, again, this will just reference your sun's position in alignment to the moon, right, on a given day, which is sort of the layers it comes to, because just the month will give you where the sun is, but then the day will give you where the moon is, right? And then understanding this is what we were starting to measure. So just because I was born, say, on the 18th, right, doesn't override the fact that I'm a Scorpio moon. 18 would be a Piscean number because it's divisible by 3, and it's even, but it's not divisible by 4. So it's water, so it's mutable water, so it's Pisces-like. So, but this doesn't override the fact, right, that I have a Scorpio moon. So if anything, because we're all in this collective sphere, this, like I said, this would add juice to my Scorpio moon, add a Piscean juice, right? Whereas the month, right, the 4 would add a Capricorn element, theoretically, right, to my Aries sun, but then understanding that what we're actually measuring is always going to take precedent over just the intent that we bring to a situation. And I know a lot of people may not want to hear that, but truth does come first, and being a vessel of truth and riding the sort of natural currents of the tree of life is the best way to go, versus just trying to take control, right? Just understanding what works with nature, because nature is what is either going to power or destroy. But either way, so that's being said, then the actual nature, your actual moon sign, is going to have more precedent than the collective thought we put towards it. But as we know, intent still does have a power too. So it's just through truth, right? Not above, in my opinion. So then the thing about, though, is 18 would be a Piscean number, just broadly speaking, right? But this is where we start to go down to, what does the moon represent, right? Well, the moon represents the moon. But it's a 28-day cycle on average, right? So this makes me think that the 28 would take precedence cyclically when we're measuring month days, right? So this would mean, say, if you're born on the 29th, it would just be like being born on the 1st, and the 30th would be like the 2nd, and the 31st would be like the 3rd. But this would be in like a dial of 28. And I'll get more to that in future videos. But that's just because 28 is such a lunar number, based on its relationship with the Earth and the Sun, right? That it's a good place to start. So what this means is that 1, 8, 15, and I think 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, yeah, would be the sort of cardinal cross of the moon. So if you're born on any of those would be like power numbers, right? And they would kind of represent 1, new moon, 8, first quarter moon, 15, full moon, and then 28, or no, not 28, 22, end quarter, right? Last quarter. So that's just something to keep in mind, and then there'd be the phases within that, right? So this is just going into how we can start to see symbolically what numbers represent based on their given system, understanding that they're always measuring something. And looking into what they measure is always going to be most important, because in my opinion, logic and intent should always function through truth, or just what we can reference in reality. So moving forward, another reason then, now that we kind of got an insight into what beach numerology can do, a little glance, right, is it can tell us specifically what numbers mean in a given system, right? And then it can also, right, like from time, right, give us more information than what is already present, and sort of elaborate on just elaborate and sort of what messages the numbers are sending, and sort of get to the root of that through their actual symbolic relationship with, like I said, whatever system they're in or whatever we're measuring, right? Because, for example, time, each time, right, say 1111 has a relationship with the cipher of time, right? Which would just be the theoretic understanding that allows us to count time, right? And each specific time is an expression of that theoretics, right? So always going back to the theoretic understanding that allows us to map out things, right, and measure, is going to tell us more information about what specific iterations of that cipher will represent. So, going further, at its height, beach numerology can tell us about an entire life situation and sort of tarot alignment. And this will be because if we get into it, by 3, by 4, and by 5, and then a compound by 8 will allow us to get an astrological alignment, like a planet in a sign. And now, so each number will represent a specific planet in a specific sign on broad mathematics, right? Because, say, if we go to time, right, like I said, we wouldn't have quite enough information, or I didn't say this, but by 60, we don't have enough information to go by 8. So, like, usually we can go by 5 and say the center fixed realizing force is either sort of real integration with the moon or spiritual integration with the sun, based on if this 5 becomes yang or yin. But if we're just using time, all we get is 3 times 4 times 5, 60, and we don't sort of have the extra layer of information that will sort of give every planet, right? Because there's like 10 planets, right? From Pluto to the moon. So, at its height, beach numerology allows us to use a number to encapsulate a life situation and event. And at its base, it allows us to see how numbers connect to source. Because without a lot of information, and in, for example, understanding what one thing would be, right, is deep. And it's going into the depths of what one would represent, right? Which would literally be the base, the dial of one. What does one represent? Where did one come from? So at its base, beach numerology connects us to philosophy and ability to understand, decode, and gain reference points on truth and nature, which is awesome. So yeah, and then another point on why to use beach numerology is it's just astrologically and practically useful. To be able to understand numbers, relationships with astrology if you're an astrologer, or to be able to use symbolic language through numbers, you know, if you're a sigil worker or something like this, to really utilize truth and focus intent through it via numbers, right? So yeah, so that's a little bit about why to use beach numerology. Bubbling.